Hi everyone, welcome to the Triaxon's Martial Art channel. Kung Fu Debunked Episode 4. Stance Training, Move or Not to Move. Right, so I made this whole series Kung Fu Debunk with the aim of covering topics that are more accessible to people who are not deeply involved with Chinese traditional martial art. You see, the majority content on my channel are intended for people who have already spent a lot of years in Chinese martial art community doing training and various other things, and specifically for those that have been training for years or even decades without finding the right answer, right? So they are the intended viewers who will appreciate the general content that I share in this video, which means a lot of the content that I do share doesn't really make a lot of sense to people who hadn't spent enough time training Chinese martial art. And it is to this end that I decided to create this series of Kung Fu Debunked, where I cover more shallow or less deep content so that everyone can get what I'm saying. And as the name suggests, the series of videos are here to debunk misinformation within the Chinese martial art community, right? If you look back, such as the first episode, which we talk about how a failed math defense look like. The second one we talk about how we overcomplicate an application that actually doesn't work if you compared to just keep it simple. And the last one will teach you how to be a grandmaster, right? In terms of doing a grandmaster demo, which is using tricks of physics rather than actual training. Now, in the fourth episode, we are going to cover something that is slightly deeper. So some of you who are not well involved within the training of Chinese martial art might not fully appreciate or understand. Now, the reason I'm covering this topic is because it was requested by some people that I know, right? They paused me the video and asked me to clarify it. This is why I'm doing this now. With that said, if any of you out there have some topics that you think are interesting and worthy of debunk, you are feel free to send me the links and I'll see if I can do a video to cover those stuff. So anything that you wonder with a true or not or something like that, you're welcome to send the links to me. Right, so this episode, we are going to talk about a particular video that is on YouTube that talks about whether you should move or not to move within the Yiquan stance practice, which is why probably only people who actually does Yiquan will fully appreciate what I'm gonna say and how I'm gonna debunk the said video. So let's first watch a piece of the video that I'm going to debunk.
In this video, I'm going to answer a common question. Can we move in Zhanzhuang? It's said that students were not allowed in Master Wang Xiangzai's original teaching. They were required to keep still in Zhanzhuang. Many of Master Wang's students, who later became Yiquan masters, kept the same way to teach Zhanzhuang. As far as I know, masters in some of today's Yiquan academic school would judge students totally wrong if they try to move when learning Zhanzhuang. Is it really that bad if we move in Zhanzhuang? Some of Master Wang's students who later also became Yiquan masters provided another method to teach Zhanzhuang. 大动不如小动，小动不如不动，不动之动，乃生生不已之动。Big movement is less good than small movement. Small movement is less good than motionless movement. The motionless movement is endless vigorous. I shot 3 videos to show you guys the 3 different sizes of movement. Each video is a 30-minute time-lapse Zhanzhuang practice of expanding and bracing stance. In all the videos, I do the same practice. I visualize the mental ease such as pulling a tree upward or downward, pushing it forward or pulling it backward, squeezing it inward or outward, and etc. And I do the exact physical work with all my body parts and muscles.
Alright, so in this piece, basically he is quoting a text written by Wang Xiangzai, the founder of Yiquan himself. However, in my opinion, well, actually I think it's pretty much the fact, he is actually misappropriating it, right? So the saying goes, 大动不如小动，小动不如不动，不动并非不动，乃生生不息之动. So roughly translate to a large motion is not as good as a smaller motion. A smaller motion is not as good as not moving. When you are not moving, you are not actually stalled. It's just because you are doing internal motion. Right, so this is a very cryptic saying, which is the kind of stuff that Wang Xiangzhai likes to write, not because he can't put it in simpler terms, but because when you write something in a cryptical Buddhist Zen-like way, which he does on purposely, he actually copies the format of a lot of the Zen manuscripts. If you compare those texts, you can see the similarities. He does it on purposely to make himself seems better educated, okay? I'm not saying that he isn't well educated, but he didn't have to write the text in such a cryptic way. So the point of that is that we can actually take this whole phrase and put it in a much simpler term. Basically, it's exactly the same understanding as Xingyi's three stages of power. You have the visible force, hidden force, and dissolved force. And what that means is, in any internal training, right, with the Xingyi, Yiquan, Taiji, or Bagua, you will find the same concept where you start with a larger movement or visible movement, right, if you look from Xingyi perspective, and then you refine that mechanic so that your movement becomes smaller, which becomes Anjing, or the hidden force, right, or in this case, 小动, smaller motion. And eventually you reach a higher level where it's almost imperceptible motion, which is what they call 不动, not moving, or in Xingyi you call it the dissolved power, 化境. So they're essentially the same thing. So you can take that complicated, cryptic saying and just say that it's a stage of between 明暗化, visible, hidden, and dissolved. And the last sentence really tells you that when you are not moving, it's just the appearance of no moving. You still have motion, it's just internal. Otherwise, you can't generate power, okay? And basically what this then tells us is that this phrase refers to the general quality of motion in Yiquan, and specifically referring to power generation, okay? It does not refer to stance training, whereas this person is trying to use this phrase to legitimize his understanding or claim that when you're doing stance training, you start by doing big movements, and then you do small movement, eventually you don't move. That is completely wrong from the way I understand this piece of text, okay? It refers to power generation. So what that actually means is, let's say I'm doing Fu'an. Initially you do a larger movement, which is something like that, and then you're gonna eventually find the alignment of your body and you can do a smaller movement. And if I were to generate power, instead of doing this, I'm gonna be there. A smaller movement, and ultimately you reach the highest level. Maybe the movement becomes even smaller than this, which I'm not there yet, so I can't really show you. But you can imagine the difference. When you come to a guy, if you do that, it's a big motion to pull him down, or it's just there. That's a smaller motion. So that's what Wang Xiangzhai's text, that piece of text, actually is referring to, right? Bigger movement, smaller movement, eventually to no movement. Possibly. I mean, I've never seen that in my life, so I can't really comment on that too much. But from a larger movement to a smaller movement is definitely the way of progression when it comes to power generation, or when it comes to punching, right? In Yiquan, if you do like the regular punch, in the beginning you have your hand here and you do a large punch, right? The Yao lineage don't really do that, but for example, the Wang Xuanjie lineage, they have large punches where they do big movement. But no matter what lineage it is, eventually the punch will become smaller. Instead of doing that, it's there, right? And that becomes a small movement, and maybe later on it will become even smaller. So that's essentially what that saying is saying. So it is incorrect to try to legitimize his understanding on stance training where you move and then you move smaller and you don't move. That's completely out of context.
In all the videos, I do the same practice. I visualize the mental ease such as pulling a tree upward or downward, pushing it forward or pulling it backward, squeezing it inward or outward, and etc.
Okay, so the problem here is that he's saying when you're doing stance training, you go up or you go down. You move back or you move forward, you open, expand, or you contract. Now, I have a problem with that word or, because the way I was taught, which is the Yao lineage, I mean, maybe his lineage teach otherwise, but I can tell with confidence that the Yao lineage, as well as some of the other lineages that I've come across in China, does not use the term or, it's and. Okay, what it means is when doing stance training, you move up and down, forward and back. You expand out and you contract in. Right? The opposing force is not this or that, it's this and that. And this can further be seen from Wang Xiangzhai's actual text, where he talks about 矛盾力, the two opposing force or the contradiction force. Right? Wang Xiangzhai is very huge on this idea of having two opposing forces or contradiction force to coexist at the same time. A force is never to one direction. If I'm going up at the same time, there must be a force going down. If I'm going forward, there must be a force going back. If I'm trying to push open, at the same time, I must be crashing in. And I'm not talking about Newton's third law, right? Where if you have a force this way, there's an equal opposite force going the other way. That's not what Wang Xiangzai's text is talking about. He's actually talking about yourself. Your body is always generating two forces to stabilize itself. So in essence, you are not moving. Even if I'm generating a force forward, I'm generating an equal amount of force backwards. So in essence, I'm actually not moving. And when I'm moving forward, I'm just moving in space. But there's still an equal force forward and equal force back to keep my body in the center. And eventually you find up, down, forward, back, and left and right, and they become a sixth directional force. So the ultimate goal of Yiquan is to actually have six forces coexist at the same time on your body, no matter what movement you are doing. And only then can you say that you found the basic structure of Yiquan. And from there you develop the higher refined version of this, which is the Hunyuan Li, right? Which is the ultimate goal in Yiquan training. So in order for you to get Hunyuan Li, you need to have the sixth directional force. And to have the sixth directional force, they have to coexist at the same time. So it can't be up or down, it's up and down, forward and back, left and right, open and closing at the same time. Now if you don't do Yiquan, or you haven't done it for long enough, this might be a very confusing concept. How can you go up and down at the same time? How can you go forward and back at the same time? Right? It doesn't make sense. You can either go forward or you can go back. How do you do it at both at the same time? Well, this video is not here to teach you how to do Yiquan. If you want to do that, find a legitimate teacher and spend years with him. Right? I can't teach you this through a video, nor can I really explain this to you properly. To actually understand it, you have to feel a person who has it. You feel the changing on the body to understand. But what I can say is this is basically something that you have to start by guiding in your intention. So in the beginning, your intention has to be pulling up, but at the same time pulling down. Like my teacher used to say, you want to put a log, right, a tree upwards, but the moment you do that, you immediately want to push the tree downwards. So you go up and immediately go down. And when you go down, you immediately go up. And as you repeat through them, of course, there are other physical aspects you have to take care of. I'm just talking about the mental aspect at the moment. Eventually, you go up, immediately down. The moment you realize you're going down, you immediately go up. And you keep doing that until you can have up and down simultaneously, alright? So, don't go home and just do this. You're not going to get it. There are other physical requirements and training that you have to go through. But conceptually, this is the key. You have to go forward and immediately go back, and go back, immediately go forward, eventually have a coexist. So the way he's describing where you go up or you go down, you go forward or you go back, if you keep doing that, you are never able to reach this state where six forces coexist on your body, on your structure at the same time. You are doing them individually. You are not trying to combine them together. Now, obviously, his argument that I imagine would be that, you can't do it at the same time in the beginning, therefore you go forward or back, up or down. But the problem with that is, if you're not even trying to force yourself into the habit of going up and immediately going down, then you never get it, right? You don't get up and down simultaneously by going up and then going down in a large movement. The reason why you don't want to move is because the moment you're moving, you lost the two opposing force. Only when you're not moving and you're guiding with your E, can you vaguely reach the surface of the idea of going up and immediately going down. You're going down, immediately going up. And as your sword bounces through the two, and your body gradually fits that, eventually you find that state. But if you move up physically and then you move down, you are constantly in opposite motion. If your body is actually moving like that, it will never reach the state where it coexists in two forces or six forces at the same time.
If you still have doubts because you were told this was not right, please hear the following. I hope I can convince you. Most of Master Wang's students were skilled and experienced martial artists. Some of them were even professionals or masters already. It was easier for them to advance their level by standing in stillness. However, some of his students didn't have any martial art experience. It was those men who later developed this method for beginners who have zero experience.
Right, so over here he tried to further legitimize his claim by inciting some historical development, which I believe to be incorrect as well. Right? So according to him, Wang Xianzhai taught students who were already masters or well-trained in other martial arts. This is partially true. Most of his the disciples had previous training, mostly from Xing Yi, but some from other styles as well. So that part is true. And Wang Xianzhai did allow them not to move in stance training. That's also true. What's not true is that some of them then change the rule so that it's easier for beginners to learn. That part I completely disagree with. Okay, and here's my reason. Simply, if you observe through a specific lineage, for example, the Yao lineage, right, come from Wang Xianzhai to Yao Zongxun to his two sons, Yao Chengguang, Yao Chengrong, as well as others like Da Cui, Cui Ruibin, Wei Yizhu, who recently passed away. So through, if you observe, let's say the Yao lineage was the one that I'm more familiar with, you can see that sure, Yao Zongxun did do a bit of Xing Yi before he met Wang Xianzhai, but his two sons did nothing other than Yiquan. Okay, and yet in the Yao lineage training, you are not allowed to move while doing stance training, not the way he's doing it. Okay, and obviously, if you want to go nitpicking, there are always small motion. You can't be constantly still. So there are small motion that you adjust yourself with, but it's not the way he's showing it, right? It's not like these big ass motions. This never ever is allowed in the Yao lineage. So his two sons, Yao Chengguang, Yao Chengrong, as well as a lot of the other disciples from Yao Zongxun, they did not have prior training. They were masters of other styles. They started fresh off blank piece of paper with Yao Zongxun learning Yiquan. And yet they didn't follow his claim where they're allowed to move. And yet they all reached pretty high level of Yiquan training. Okay, I mean Yao lineage is probably one of the best lineages that I've ever came across. I mean, I do admit I haven't met all of them, across China. But all the ones that I've came across, Yao lineage have probably the best quality in terms of third generation masters, right? They have like the best skills that I've ever came across. So their skills speak for themselves, and it proves that their method, which is to not allow you to move from the start of stance training, it works. Okay. So he's claimed that it doesn't work for beginners. That's completely bogus. I don't know who his teacher is or what kind of nonsense his teacher fed him, but I disagree with that. And from a historical point of view, maybe there are other lineages that do that, but you can't say that is the norm or that is the correct way, because all the lineages that I've came across does not do that, and they do still show very good results. And quite frankly, his own ability is actually not impressive at all. So I mean, admittedly, I don't know anyone else from his lineage, but from his own ability, judging that compared to the people I know from Yao lineage, hands down the Yao lineage produce better results, and that's from not moving rather than allowing to move.
Activities corresponding with the mental visualization, beginners tend to do the big movement because they have very limited ability to balance their yi and force.
Alright, so over here you can see him moving, and this is even a bigger problem. If you see from the side, when he's moving up and down, forward and back, etc., his entire body is shifting. His weight is going out of proportion. His tailbone is sticking out. His whole frame is out of alignment. That's one of the biggest taboo or mortal sin when it comes to any internal martial art training. The whole point of doing stance, any stance, whether it's 混元桩、技击桩 or Xing Yi's 三体式 or even Tai Chi's 无极桩, right? The whole point of doing any stance is to teach yourself the correct body alignment. Now you can't get the correct body alignment if you're constantly shifting and breaking your own alignment. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Imagine you have various pieces of object, right, like our bones, and you want them to be stick together, so you put glue on the edges and you stick them together. And what you do, you have to keep them there for a sufficient amount of time for the glue to stick. If you put glues on two surfaces, you stick them together, and then every 5 seconds you move them around, are they gonna stick? No. So the way he's doing it, he's constantly breaking his own balance, and as a result, he won't get a correct structure at the end of the day. It's frankly a waste of time. Okay, so the whole point of stance training is to put yourself in the correct structure. Your master, your teacher, should tell you what is the requirement, right? Where do you put your tailbone, where do you put your waist, where do you put your spine, where your head goes, where your shoulder blade goes, all of that. And then you try to maintain that for as long as you can. And when you revert to your old habit, your teacher should come and correct you and correct you in the right way, and you keep that for as long as you can. And through months or even years of training of this constant correction, you eventually form a habit that the moment you lift up your arm, when you attempt to do a stance, your whole body falls into the right place, and teacher will look at you and say, well, there's no mistake, your whole structure is correct. And eventually I do it to a point where if I wake you up in the middle of the night, you can naturally assume the stance without even having to think about it, right? That is the point of doing stance. Why you want to do it for an hour or 2 hours in some extreme cases? It's not to build muscles, okay? It can be used seen as building strength, but most importantly to form the habit of the correct stance, the correct position. And there's only one correct position when it comes to stance, right? When it comes to Yiquan stance, I mean, Xingyi have their own stance, but in Yiquan stance, your body has to be in that specific alignment for it to be correct. If you're constantly shifting, you are not building that habit. You are actually counterproductive. You are going against the very purpose of doing stance. And now you might wonder, why do you need to have this body in that specific structure? And then also, by extension, why do you even attempt to imagine a tree and pulling, pushing, opening, closing, forward and back? Why is that visualization important? So that is a part of the internal martial art practice that you can find in every internal martial art, but often people don't talk about it, okay? It's basically there to stretch your tendons and open your bones. Yiquan, on Wang Xingzhai's paper, he almost doesn't mention tendon and bone. But if you actually spend time with the legitimate lineages, right, they talk about it within the style. He just never quite made it into the text, because the text is something that everyone has access to, even the public. But there are certain knowledge and training that he passed from word to mouth to his disciples. Those things you don't find in Wang Xingzhai's own writings. And training tendon and bone is one of these things that he doesn't really talk about in his writing, but it's very important in the actual lineages that I've came across. So what that means is, in short, it means that imagining the tree is there to train opening and closing of joints. If you don't know what that is, I already have a video called the 4 Fundamental Forces of Internal. In it, I covers one of the 4 fundamental forces is opening and closing of joints. So I'm not going to go into too much detail there. However, let's just put it into context with the visualization of the tree, right? So if you just stand here with this Jiji Zhuang or Hunyuan Zhuang, it doesn't matter. So if you just stand there without any visualization or intent to guide your body, then your joints are naturally the way it is by default. In other words, it's not going to extend, it's not going to open. You can stand like this till kingdom come, and nothing will happen. Maybe every, once in a blue moon, when someone is really talented, he will actually find it by himself. But majority of the cases, if you do this for the rest of your life, you get some arm strength because you're holding your arms up, you're going to build some muscles, but you never reach the opening and closing of joint, right? I've observed this with various people that I know throughout the years that does Yiquan stance training. So who doesn't actually consciously know about extending of joints, they don't get it even after 10 years, which is why often in China I hear stories. I meet people who say they've done Yiquan for 10 years, their arm got strings, and then some of them can take punches on the body. It's all like conditioning through doing stance, but they don't have the type of power that can send people flying and break people's structure. And that's because they're not consciously trained the opening of joints. And some of them they're even imagining the trees, right? But if you don't link that imagination or visualization with what's actually happening physically on your body, it yields no result. Now again, this video isn't here to teach you Yiquan stance. So if you're interested in that, you gotta find a legitimate teacher. But just for the knowledge sake and combat misinformation, right? So what happens is, when I'm actually pulling up, and then at the same time I'm gonna want to pull this tree down, what that essentially does is it allows me to have a control point to put my head up and push my tailbones and my hips down so the whole spine stretches open. At the moment I'm trying to break the tree open and crush it close, what's actually happening is that I'm gradually opening my shoulder joints, I'm gradually extending my elbow joints, and my finger joint, my wrist joint, all of them are expanding outwards like a sphere. And when I'm pushing forward and I'm pulling back, then that works on especially the wrist and the elbow joint from extending this way, as well as the chest concaving in, the back bulging out. So when you have this 6-directional force, obviously you start with two pairs at a time, right? Up and down, forward and back, left and right. Then what eventually happens is, if you connect that visualization with the body, then naturally your joint will start to stretch open, because that's where your intention is guiding it. And the whole point of having a 6-directional force exist simultaneously is so that every aspect of your body, of your joint, are stretched open. So you're not doing a stance just like normally you're like this, you just hold up your arm, so like that, you actually extend the joint open. I don't know if you can see it clearly from this video, but if you're doing a regular stance, which is like this, you might even keep your hand straight, but this is not the same as if I start doing that, right? It's a very small change to the body, but when I'm doing this, all my joints and tendons are starting to stretch and open. And that is the real purpose of imagining that tree. And once you've got to this stage, you no longer need the tree. The tree is just a control point to get to the stage. Once you know the feeling of extending of joints, then you can actually forget about the tree. Okay, another thing that I need to consider is if it is true that beginner can't stand still, so they're allowed to move, then why don't they just start by doing 视力? Because each already has a portion of the training which you're allowed to move, which is called 视力, which is 伏案, 勾挂, 旋法. It doesn't matter, right? You're allowed to move. So if motion is needed for beginners, then just start with 视力 and then do stance. Right? That will be the logical solution. But why does Wang Xiangzai explicitly say in his take that you have to first start with 站桩, stance training, and then 视力, and then 发力? Why in that order? Then clearly, his logic of easing people into with motion, then still it doesn't make sense. Now, the whole purpose of 视力 is to mobilize the structure you really find doing stance. So moving 视力 is pointless if you don't understand what that structure is yet, right? So which is what when you start off, you do 站桩, is to find that constant relationship, right? Where is the elbow in relation to my shoulder? Where is the shoulder in relation to my chest? Where is my spine in relation to my head? So when you hold every part of your joints and bones knows its place in relation to each other, meaning you have the perfect structure, and then you start moving to see if you can still keep that structure while moving. And when you realize you lost the structure, you go back to stance and you find it again. And once you find it, you start trying to move it again. And then in the beginning you want to move it big, and gradually you want to move it small so you can feel that you keep that constant and you shake it in a certain motion, but everything is still in place, right? Can't really mimic this, but just an example, right? If you look at a non-practitioner or beginner, when doing 伏案, his hand will be moving kind of out of sync with the body. Then you know that this is just an arm motion, the body isn't involved. And as through training stance, so that you know the relationship between the chest, the back, and the arm, then you start to feel that, okay, I'm going to move my body together with my arm. And it's easy in the beginning when the movements are bigger, but you have more time to check these relations. And then eventually you get to a point where you want to be here and you just do that. But when I'm doing this, my whole body, everything is still involved. And that is the natural progression of Yi Quan training. And also further proves that his understanding of it is incorrect.
Some may wonder about the internal movement. How are they connected? Does the internal movement have something to do with moving from stage to stage? The external movement and the internal movement are naturally connected. We don't separate them in this method. In stage 1, the external movement is big. There's basically non-internal movement in the beginning, but there will be minimum internal movement at the end of this stage. In stage 2, the external movement is small. There is some internal movement. Your internal organs start to move automatically, but not remarkably. In stage 3, the external movement is none. There is remarkable internal movement. All your internal organs move thoroughly.
Right now, this part of the video, he constantly talk about internal motion, and his understanding is that you start with external motion. The moment as you move towards less movement, the internal motion happens automatically. And he talk about your organs start to move. I don't know what planet he's on, what kind of mushroom he's smoking, but yes, I have not heard the Yao lineage at least to talk about internal organs moving. I mean, how does your organ move? I mean, maybe your lungs can cramp up or something, but your organs don't move, right? I don't know where he heard that from. That doesn't fit any of the Yi Quan lineages I've talked to and came across and studied under. And quite frankly, I think he has absolutely no idea what this internal motion actually is, which is why he can't actually explain it, right? No matter how complicated it is, if you understand it, you should be able to explain it to some extent. Now, I'm not saying my explanation is definitely the truth, but it most certainly is it's possible to be more true than what he's saying, right? And the way I was taught that Yao Zongxin once said to the disciple, his son, that internal motion is basically like the thermometer you use to check your own temperature, right? So it's basically in Chinese called 水银灌注, which is the mercury that shoot up. So if you imagine your body is a tube, it's a mercury that shoot up, and that is the internal motion. And before anyone jump into the conclusion that he's talking about qi power, no, it's not qi. Wang Xianzhai explicitly says that like dantian, those things don't exist. No, I'm not here to I don't personally agree with his extremist view, but one can pretty much say for certain that Wang Xianzhai is a non-believer when it comes to qi power. So when Yao Zongxin talk about 水银灌注, the motion of mercury, he's not talking about qi, he's talking about force. So basically, once all the structures are connected, right, i.e. the joint, because it's the joint, if you don't extend them, they are loose. And if they are loose, then any force you generate from the body is going to get lost on the loose joint. And if you tense it up, while it is connected and it's not losing power, it's stopping power. It's almost like a tube, and you're squeezing it in the middle, and the water can't pass through. So the idea is actually to keep the whole structure connected, but not tense so it doesn't get stuck. At which point, if I generate any motion from my hips, from my back, waist, or spine, it gets passed on to the hand. And that is basically the idea of mercury flowing through the body that Yao Zongxin talks about. And basically, this only happens when your body is connected, when all the joints are extended. And obviously, it's called a 内动 because as you practice, you eventually don't need a large movement, right? You need a smaller movement, or a punch, you don't need to punch there. It's just that. And obviously, even this is kind of a big movement to really high level Yiquan muscle. Maybe they can do it even smaller. And as that happens, that's what Wang Xianzhai is referring to as internal movement, because instead of trying to displace the limb to generate momentum, what you're doing is you're rotating various joints so that the force gets transferred through your punches. Right? Again, if you're still confused about this, check out the video on the 4 fundamental forces. That pretty much covers this type of idea within the 4 fundamental forces. So that's what actually, as far as I was taught, is referred to as internal motion. Right? It's not something very absurd or abstract, where it is like you do big movements and you don't move, and when you don't move, something else is moving in your body. That's too hippie, right, for my liking, and I don't believe this guy actually knows what he's talking about. And by observing his stance and the way he moves, I don't think he even got skeletal structure. And it's people like this that really gives Chinese martial art a bad name, right? When people doesn't actually understand what they're talking about, they haven't really tested their skills, and here they think they're good enough to start educating people on what Chinese martial arts is all about. And my channel's main goal is to combat this misinformation, so that ultimately we can build a much better environment for Chinese martial arts, so that when people come to study, they don't waste 10 years learning the wrong thing, only to waste their time and passion and eventually move on to something else, right? I mean, this is a very hard thing because there are probably more fraud at this moment in time. There's more fraud in this community than people who are legit. But like there's a saying, 有一口气点一盏灯，念念不忘必有回响, which means you have one breath, you light one lamp or one candle, right? If everyone is able to do their own parts, then eventually, hopefully, we can overturn this bad situation and turn Chinese martial art community into something of quality and truth rather than of a lot of lies, deceit, and misinformation. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions on this topic, you can feel free to leave in the comment below, and I'll definitely try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe me on YouTube channel. That would be great. And if you can support me on Patreon, that'll be even better and it'll help me out greatly. And I always want to give a shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thanks for all your support, especially through the pandemic. I know that everyone is pretty tough on their wallets during this pandemic. So for those of you who have supported me through the pandemic, I greatly appreciate your support. And always feel free to contact me with any questions on current content, existing content, and any suggestion for future content. I'll always be very happy to help all of you out. And together, right, let's hope we can make Chinese martial art world real again. So thanks for watching Trice's Martial Art Channel, Kung Fu Debunk Episode 4. Keep safe out there, and I'll see you next time.